Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and with Game Week 4 just round the corner, I'm going to take a look at not only my team selection, but also all of the key talking points ahead of the deadline to help you get set up for FPL this week. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's crack on with it. Okay, so let's get going, but a quick reminder, my mini league is still open and live. The code is above me. If you can't read that, it's RQ7NIR. I'd love for you to be a part of it. And as always, any of the data I talk about today is from Fantasy Football Hub. There's still 50% off. So if you wanted to download the app and get involved, the link is in the description below. In the meantime, though, 69 points for Game Week 3. Not a bad score in general, but enough for only a pretty significant red arrow in Game Week 3. The reason being for that, the average score was incredibly high because not only one, but both of the mega premiums hauled, and Salah unfortunately did the damage for me. I did captain Haaland, so that kind of subdued any sort of major rank drop off, but I still managed to double my rank from Game Week 2 and came out at 1.1 million, which of course isn't ideal. But the ranks are so close together in terms of the points at the moment that one haul from one player you either own or don't own could be the difference between a very significant green arrow or a very significant red arrow. So don't worry too much if you're looking at a rank of around 3-4 million at this point. It is still very close, so don't be disheartened. Keep making the moves and you will be up there come the end of the season. Do not worry. In the meantime, though, let's have a look at my team in particular. Not too many points in the back line. I did get the clean sheet from Trent and I did get the assist from Robinson. So overall, not too bad. A 50% return ratio from my keeper added into the defense as well. I'm okay with that. Until this week, every single one of my goalkeepers and defenders had returned. So overall, a good start from my back line. Into midfield, that's where the real trouble started to lie. Now, 3 players without a single attacking return. Bruno is very annoying to own, and we will discuss that later. Rodgers was my transfer in, didn't get me anything, but did look promising in patches and in little fits and spurts. And Smith Rowe, of course, got 2 points as well. Saka got the assist, but nothing more. And that is going to be another talking point when we get to later on in the video. Up top, Isak returning was obviously good news, got the bonus points too, so it was nice to see him getting something, as up until this point he was starting to be a bit of an annoyance, a bit like Bruno as well. And of course Haaland with back-to-back hat-tricks got me the 17 points doubled. And really, the major thing I missed out on was Salah's haul. Now, even if Salah had hauled against me, if Trent's goal would have stood, that probably would have been enough for at least a grey arrow or non-arrow, or maybe a very small green arrow if Trent had gotten a few bonus points chucked in there as well. But these are the fine margins at this point, and I'm not going to beat myself up too much about it. Meanwhile, though, my bench is looking shakier and shakier week on week. Obviously, Barco is in Seville at the moment, so I can't rely on him. Hall is coming off the bench for 1-pointers week on week. And Minte bench this week will come back into my starting lineup, which means Adam Armstrong is likely to be that first name on the bench at the moment. And he's getting taken off earlier and earlier every week as it stands, which I am surprised about and might be an issue for me even in Game Week 4. So it looks like my bench is getting weaker and weaker. But with the wildcard coming soon for me, it's just whether or not I can hold off on making transfers to positions that aren't starting for me regularly, and hopefully I can avoid injuries and therefore not have to worry too much about my bench for at least 2 more weeks. In the meantime though, 69 points, not great. Red arrow, of course, but do let me know in the comments below how you got on, and definitely feel free to brag if you got a significantly better score than me. And I'm looking at mainly the players with both Haaland and Salah in their teams at the moment, probably outscored me by quite a long way. So as always, let's take a quick look at some of the key issues for FPL managers ahead of the deadline. And I've picked out 5. There are a couple more, but I think these are 5 of the main talking points at the moment from the international break. Martin Ødegaard owners will feel very hard done by because he did come off for Norway with a pretty significant ankle injury. It does look, and from what we're seeing from online prognosis so far and some of the quotes coming out, that he could be out for a number of game weeks. Now, we don't know exactly to what extent that is going to be at the moment, but what we can say for sure, or relatively for sure, is that he'll miss game week 4 against Spurs, and it's also looking pretty likely that he'll miss game week 5 against Man City. Now, obviously, those aren't easy games, but if you're a Martin Ødegaard owner, that will be frustrating. It's also how that impacts Arsenal as a unit going forward as well, though. So it's whether or not that injury is going to make Saka a slightly worse pick, maybe Havertz a slightly worse pick as well, because he might get dropped back into the midfield, especially with Rice missing that game week 4 fixture against Spurs. It might be more likely that Havertz plays a midfield role to cover off those frailties or those weaknesses in Arsenal's midfield 3, because they're missing 2 of their key men there. So Martin Ødegaard, not owned by a load of managers, but if you own him, obviously he's a transfer out, and also if you own other Arsenal players, then it might be one to think about as well. Moving down the list, Ezri Konsa came off for England. That doesn't look quite so serious. It looks like more of a contact injury. We should hear more come the press conferences when Unai Emery does speak, so do keep an eye out for that. But as far as I know, and as far as we can tell so far, it looks precautionary. Lee Carsley, sorry, I nearly said Gareth Southgate there, also mentioned after the game it didn't look too bad. So fingers crossed that he'll be okay for game week 4. And I think the only way that I'd be concerned about starting him is if I had no cover on my bench and you couldn't rely on a defender to come off your bench just on the off chance that he doesn't start. Now, Villa's fixtures are very good, so barring any sort of significant setback for Konsa, I'd probably hold on to him and hope he plays game week 4 as it stands. Moving down, Palmer and Watkins I'll talk about in one. Both precautionary. Palmer's already been seen in training as well, so I'd be very surprised if either of them didn't start in game week 4. I don't think they're going to be massive issues, but obviously do listen out for the press conference notes as always. I would be surprised if they were transfers out for you this week though. Moving down, Solanke's the final one I want to talk about. Now, we haven't heard anything as of yet, but obviously went into the international break still injured. And Ange was talking about the international break as an opportunity to hopefully get him back to full fitness when he first got injured a few weeks ago now. So we should hear something from Ange in his pre-match press conference. He's usually fairly forthright and open with his notes on injuries especially. So hopefully any of you that still have him in your side will get clarity as to the situation. I would be surprised if he's out for much longer, but at least we'll most likely know one way or the other. Now, for me, if you haven't transferred him out by now, you might as well wait for the press conference. Otherwise, I think he's gone for most people anyway. So on to some of the hot prospects facing us ahead of game week 4. Now, Salah is so obvious for any of us who don't own him that I haven't bothered to include him on here, especially because I'll be talking about him later on in this video at length. So don't worry, I haven't forgotten him. But his teammate on the other side, on the other wing, Luis Diaz, is also looking really promising and has gotten off to a very, very good start for Liverpool so far this season. He is going to be a very tempting transfer in for a lot of managers this game week. However, it is worth noting that the international break often isn't too kind to South American players because they have to travel a very long way. That's not to say he won't start in game week 4, by the way. I still would put relatively good money on him getting a game from the start and also good minutes in game week 4, but it is worth noting that they do have a lot of competition for spots in that forward 3, in that front 3 for Liverpool. So it wouldn't shock me to see him coming off around the 65th, 70th minute, even though he has looked really good so far. And as we've also seen so far, that hasn't really impacted him that negatively anyway. He's been coming off early in most game weeks, and he's still managed to get those returns. So still a good transfer in. Not as good as Salah, of course, but he is 5 million less. So you've got to bake that into your thinking. And he's not going to be transferred in for one of the other premiums. You can look at the fun zone midfielders, we like to call them, around the 6.5 to 7.5 margin. And Luis Diaz looks like the best of those at the moment. It is worth noting, of course, those limited minutes will maybe impact his upside long term, but he is in scintillating form right now, so I would have nothing against anyone bringing him in. Another player that's been off in South America is João Pedro. Now, we've seen all day on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, all of these people monitoring his flights, whether or not he's going to land in time and get a late flight back to Brighton from Manchester, blah, blah, blah. He's going to play in Game Week 4. I would be very, very surprised if he didn't. I'm sure that the long flight isn't going to impact him too negatively, and he is an important player for Brighton. But these international breaks are not ideal for the South American players, as we know, and that might impact his minutes towards the end of the game. Now, I would be very surprised if he didn't start, as I've mentioned, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he came off slightly earlier. And what we've seen with Hertzler so far is he likes to make 2 or 3 midfield or attacking swaps around the 75th to 85th minute. Now, obviously, that's still pretty late in the game, so João Pedro owners and those of you bringing him in, I wouldn't let that put me off of bringing him in at all. He'll still be a very good pick, but he might not quite get the 90 minutes that we're used to him getting so far, and it might be that he comes off instead of Welbeck, for instance, who obviously hasn't been away on international duty. So we might see that. But long term, he's still a great pick. And even this week, against Ipswich at home, a great pick nonetheless. Moving down, Rico Lewis, I would be very tempted to bring him in. He's obviously very good value for money as long as he keeps his place for Man City. But they do have competition. They haven't had their full squad yet. So I still just want a week or two before I'm fully committed on the Rico Lewis bandwagon. I still feel like Pep could do something to really spring a surprise on us. And I just want to be ultra sure before bringing him in that he is a player that I can rely on week in, week out. That might be too cautious for you, and I completely understand if you want to go for him now, especially if you're on a wild card. I would probably take the chance. But I'd also be sure to have a playing bench ready to come on in case he doesn't get the start. And obviously, Kyle Walker exists. He hasn't been subbing on for Rico Lewis so far, but it wouldn't shock me to see that substitution at a later point, or we see randomly Kyle Walker start where Rico Lewis doesn't. So I just want a week or two more information just to be certain that it's Rico Lewis's spot to lose for the foreseeable. Antoine Semenyo and Brian Mbeumo, both great options in the midfield. I like the look of both of them. Great data for both of them so far, and they're both looking like talismanic figures as well. But in both cases, I would probably just want a week or two. They're not high priority transfers in for me right now, especially in Mbeumo's case, because the fixtures aren't okay or aren't great just yet. Semenyo's, I would say, are a little bit better. I would say 3 of the next 4 are very much attackable for Bournemouth players. But again, I don't think it's a high priority position where a load of managers are thinking, oh, I hate my 5.5 million midfielder, I need to bring in another one. Smith Rowe, Minte, they've been okay. So I don't think you need to get rid of them right now for the next big thing. But if you're on a wild card, Semenyo would probably be marginally my favoured 5.5 pick as it stands. So on to some of my potential transfers for Game Week 4. And unfortunately, we're looking at some premium swapping. And I hate doing this because it never sits right, because whoever you're bringing out is always likely to get a return. However, in this case, I think it's warranted. So to explain myself, what I've done is I've put the next 2 fixtures for both players, and to the right-hand side of both, I've put the expected points according to Fantasy Football Hub, just to give a sense for what we're kind of ballpark expecting from these players across the next 2 game weeks. The reason it's only the next 2 game weeks is I'm wildcarding most likely in Game Week 6 or ahead of Game Week 6. So I'm only really concerned about the next 2. And with that in mind, selling Saka is something that I'm probably willing to do to help me get up to Mo Salah. The reason for that, despite Saka in his own right being a great player, 6.6 points expected this game week against Spurs away from home, Salah is expected 8.3. So again, you take that with a pinch of salt, obviously, but Salah at home, and we shouldn't underestimate the impact of a home fixture over an away one, is going to be, on average, the more threatening asset than Bukayo Saka. Now, the second main factor here is that Saka plays Man City away from home again, away, next game week, in Game Week 5. Meanwhile, Salah is arguably in fact, maybe not even arguably, will probably be the standout captaincy choice at home to Bournemouth, where he's expected a very high points total again. Now, as it stands, the best captain in my team would probably have to be Erling Haaland at home to Arsenal in game week 5. So to bring in Salah this week seems sensible, not only to give me the boost of expected points this week ahead of Saka, but also next week in advance to make sure I've got the best captaincy option in game week 5. Now, across the two, I do expect Salah to beat Saka, but that doesn't mean I think Saka's a bad pick. You can definitely find a way to have both of them. Unfortunately, in my team and in my setup, that's going to be really hard to do without taking significant hits. And this is one transfer I kind of have booked in from the start, and I'm willing to make in the knowledge that it could hurt me, but just hoping that Salah outscores Saka over the next two with 2 home fixtures, 2 better fixtures. I think it is likely, but it's certainly not impossible that Saka really punishes me. I do want Salah though. However, I need to find another little bit of cash, and I need to use another transfer to find that cash. So sacrifices do need to be made. So let's take a look at the 2 different options now. So option number 1 is a popular one that's being discussed a lot in the community this week, and that is downgrading your forward line slightly to bring in one of the hot picks at a really reasonable price. So downgrading Isak to João Pedro. Now, on paper, I really don't mind this move at all. I understand why managers are making it, especially to release some funds to use elsewhere, perhaps on another premium like Salah, or perhaps if you need to get to Erling Haaland, for instance. But I do have my hesitations. The reason for that is that despite Isak not getting off to an electric start, his data's still not terrible, 0.46 XGI per 90, and it's actually so far better than João Pedro's at 0.40 XGI per 90. So it is a sacrifice. It is downgrading slightly in terms of the player quality, in terms of the underlying data. But not only that, I've also looked at the next 2 game weeks like I did with Saka and Salah, and Isak is also expected to do really well over the next 2 game weeks, whereas João Pedro also expected to do pretty well, over 5 points per week, but it is slightly downgrading the expected output from the next 2 game weeks. Now, Ipswich and Nottingham Forest at home for João Pedro, very, very promising. Home fixtures as well, so again, we shouldn't underestimate the impact of that. And Ipswich, of course, will not be that much of a difficult defence to break down in comparison to some of the more stalwart Premier League sides. So it is definitely looking like a fixture to target. However, Isak in his own right has good fixtures. Wolves away from home, who have already shipped 6 goals to Chelsea, and Newcastle aren't that much of a worse team in terms of their attacking output to Chelsea anyway. And then they go up against Fulham in game week 5. Now, again, you wouldn't be shocked to see Isak or Newcastle do well in that fixture either. And yes, Nottingham Forest isn't exactly the toughest fixture for Brighton, but Forest's underlying defensive data isn't that bad. So looking at this on merit, yes, you're getting quite a lot of cash from this downgrade, but I don't think you can sit here and say for sure that João Pedro outscores Isak over the next 2 game weeks. In fact, I would say that marginally, I would expect Isak to outperform João Pedro. Now, obviously, that could go either way. It's a pretty 50-50 call, but I wonder if there's another move I could make that I would be expecting greater output from my manoeuvre than I would from the original player, and also save the money as well. And I think I found one that I can just about make peace with, that I prefer to downgrading Isak, who I still back to come good over the next 2 game weeks. So I've thought long and hard over these 2 different transfers, these 2 different options I could use to upgrade Saka to Salah this game week. And I also even considered rolling my free transfers and just playing Bruno and Saka, and obviously Isak as well, and just saving the transfer for next week. But having looked at some of the expected points and the underlying data as well, I think it would be silly of me to not bring in Salah this game week, especially with some of Arsenal's injuries and suspensions this week against Spurs as well. I think making that upgrade is definitely worthwhile, and therefore I'm willing to make a sacrifice elsewhere to free up the budget. The player that I'm most willing to get rid of at the moment is one that has frustrated me a lot so far. I haven't completely given up on him as an FPL pick. I still think he will come good, and that is Bruno Fernandes. Now, in Game Week 4, he plays Southampton away from home. I don't think you need to be an expert FPL manager to know that that is a good fixture and that Bruno is fairly likely to return in that game. So this could punish me and it could hurt quite a lot, especially as a Southampton fan, if he goes and he hauls big against my own club. However, his ownership is low. So in terms of an FPL pain, I don't think it's going to hurt so much if he does go in haul. And the player that I'm bringing in, Eberechi Eze, is a fantastic pick in his own right and is actually expected, according to Hub, to score better than Bruno is in this game week, as well as the following game week when the two clubs play each other. I think the important thing to note here is that Palace have the two home games, Leicester at home, so another promoted club, and then Man United at home in game week 5. I think that's what's boosting the expected output for this player and for Crystal Palace generally over the next 2 game weeks. Yes, I expect Bruno to come good, but whether or not he hauls is a different matter. And 2 away fixtures where Man United themselves haven't looked too sharp just yet. I think he'll do well against Southampton, of course, but I also equally back Eze to do very well at home to Leicester, another promoted club. So for the extra cash that I need to upgrade Saka to Salah, I think that this is a maneuver I'm willing to make. And actually, the output might be even arguably slightly better from Eze than it would have been with Bruno in the first place over the next 2 game weeks in total. So again, it's not a move that I take lightly, and I did consider just rolling the transfers. But I think in parallel with my Saka to Salah move, over the next 2 game weeks, I do think it pays off, especially because it gives me that extra captaincy choice for game week 5, that being Salah. So whilst I'm expecting pain, I think I'm willing to make the sacrifice. Let me know in the comments below whether or not you agree with that logic and if there are any concerns that you would have over getting rid of Bruno or Saka ahead of Game Week 4, because I certainly have mine. So on to the Game Week 4 Captaincy Matrix, and this one might be a little bit shorter than usual because there are 2 standout options. There often are, because Salah and Haaland are both fantastic FPL options, and they both have home fixtures against relatively weaker sides in Game Week 4. Now, I do think that Haaland is the standout pick, so if you have both of them, I would probably go with Haaland this week, not just because of the expected points, but also the underlying data for Haaland so far this season. If you've been playing FPL for a long time, you'll know that having an XGI per 90 of over 1.00 is absolutely phenomenal. And he's not just nudging ahead of that at the moment. He's at 1.26 XGI per 90, which is superhuman numbers at the moment. We do expect that to regress a little bit over time, but Brentford have conceded a lot of chances and a lot of shots to weaker opposition than Man City this season. Even Southampton, I think, got 18 shots against them. So I do expect Man City to get plenty of chances, and Haaland is in the form of his life so far. So I think 8.7 expected points from Fantasy Football Hub is actually on the low side, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him continue his hot streak in front of goal in Game Week 4. Salah is also a very good pick. Obviously, gotten off to a very fast start in FPL this season as well. Nottingham Forest aren't an absolutely elite defence, but they are better defensively than Brentford, or at least that's what we can see so far this season and based on the data as well. And he is less of a goal threat than Haaland pound for pound, but that's not to say he's a bad captaincy option. If you don't have Haaland, I would still be very confident with Salah. 8.3 expected points in this game week and 0.94 XGI per 90 is still absolutely ludicrous numbers. So don't be disheartened at all if you're going with Salah. I like them both, but I think if you do have them both, Haaland is the standout pick. If you don't have either of them or you want to go differential, you could look at Eze. 0.45 XGI per 90 isn't that amazing, but 7.2 expected points, and against promoted side Leicester, who have struggled so far this season, I wouldn't be surprised to see a haul from him this week at all. The other one on this sheet, Saka, away at Spurs. Spurs concede a lot of big chances, and you'd expect a doggy to bomb forward down that side when Spurs are attacking, so Saka could break on them at pace and get in behind their high line. So I don't hate it, but in comparison to the other options on this sheet, I think he is weaker, and obviously, as we've discussed, Martin Ødegaard most likely being out and Rice being out will impact him a little bit from an attacking point of view. So I do think that he's a slightly weaker pick in terms of captaincy than the other three on this spreadsheet. Do let me know who your favourite captaincy option is in Game Week 4 and whether you've currently got the armband on Haaland or Salah, or perhaps someone else. Okay, so now taking a look at my team selection for Game Week 4, and let's imagine that I have made those transfers. I do have 0.2 in terms of wiggle room right now, that I can maybe wait until the press conferences to make them, just in case there's any sort of surprise injury news that I need to react to, not just to those two players, but also across my 11, because, like I mentioned, I do have a weak bench, and I want to talk about that just briefly. So Armstrong, Hall and Barco, obviously not expecting any points from Barco anytime soon, and also Valdemarson as well as my keeper on the bench, not expecting any points from him. So I am very much relying on my starting 11 as it stands. But as I've talked about at length in several videos so far this season, I do plan on wildcarding at the end of Game Week 5, so into Game Week 6. So I only need to survive this game week and one more week before I'm hitting the wildcard and I can get rid of all of these players that are basically deadwood in my side without having to use free transfers to do so. So as long as I can have a starting 11 I'm happy with, I'm also happy to just have these players rotting on my bench and take the 1-pointers from the likes of Hall and possibly even Armstrong as well for the next couple of game weeks if I have to. As long as they're not impacting my starting 11, I can make peace with it. On to my starting 11, I'm pretty happy with it as a whole for Game Week 4. Away at Spurs for Raya, I'm not really expecting too much, but Arsenal's defence is elite, so maybe I get lucky there. 3 home fixtures for my back 3. So Nottingham Forest at home for Trent, that's a good fixture. Porro at home to Arsenal, again, you're not really expecting much from a clean sheet point of view, but perhaps we can see something going forward from him. And I never really hate starting Porro because he's always an attacking threat. Robinson has been fantastic for me, so obviously going to continue with my faith in him. And then moving into my midfield 5, those 2 transfers made, I really like the look of it so far. Salah, obviously a captaincy option, but I am putting the armband on Haaland at the moment. And Eze as well, great option at home to Leicester this week. It does make me miss the likes of Bruno and Saka a little bit less when you see these 2 options at home. Good fixtures in Game Week 4. I'm not so worried about the players I'm bringing out or subbing out because of that. Also, across my midfield 5, it's again a full bank of home fixtures. So Everton at home for Rodgers, Smith Rowe gets West Ham at home, and Minte, who I really like as a differential option this week, at home to Ipswich. I'm really hoping for big things from him. He's like 2% owned for me at the moment. So again, I'm really hoping that differential comes in clutch for me this week. Up top, no surprises. It's Haaland with the armband at home to Brentford, as discussed, and Isak away at Wolves because I'm going to hold on to him and resist the João Pedro transfer for this game week. I'm really happy with my setup for Game Week 4, so let's wait and see what comes about to ruin my smile once again ahead of the deadline. But I will make the transfers probably tomorrow after some of the press conferences. No big rush unless there are price fluctuations overnight that I will, of course, monitor. As we reach the end of today's video, thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I've just hit 2,000 subscribers, so a thank you to all of you who are new around here. I really, really appreciate you joining the channel and subscribing as well. Thank you so, so much. And if you've got any of your own dilemmas or questions that I wasn't able to answer in today's video, please do leave them in the comments below and I'll try and get back to you before the Game Week 4 deadline. In the meantime though, good luck in Game Week 4 and I'll see you on the other side as we start our preparation ahead of Game Week 5.